All right, well, welcome to, we're on chapter 15 of Systematic Theology. Did you guys enjoy it, by the way? I mean, it's a lot of stuff, deep stuff. And Gary's like, feels like, I don't know, you're like, you feel like you're back in school again, huh? You're working on your master's degree here. But the good news is you know what? We're already a quarter of the way done with this book. Believe it or not. Because those last two chapters are the longest chapters in the book. So I think there's another chapter that covers Calvinism and Arminianism that's almost as long. It's pretty, which needs to be. Well, Providence is pretty long too. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, thanks for just plugging away. But that's one of the nice things about having it every 2 weeks. And then now we've got a month-long break, so you've got plenty of time to read Providence. You can come back from Florida for the, in Providence. Mo's going to try and make it to the men's retreat, so I'm praying that you can get here. That'd be awesome. Yeah. So that's going to be really fun. So what I wanted to do to open up is I just wanted to point out, some of you have already seen this because you've been in deeper dive with me, but Francis Schaeffer has been helpful to me in so many ways, and it's too bad Brian's at a Dodger game right now, having Dodger dog. I told him to send me a picture, so hopefully he'll send me a picture of him eating some Dodger dogs, but he's at Dodger Stadium tonight. I don't even know who they're playing, but... Okay, so Brian drew this for me in deeper diving. He did a much better job. But this is a two-story house, believe it or not. So in the first story, so this is the first story, and it used to be before Darwin's Origin of the Species. The first story and the second story were one and the same. In other words, pretty much everybody believed that there was a supernatural God. Supernatural, and they believed in naturalism as well, that again, most people at that time, or people were either supernaturalists, and then there was a small percentage of deists that believe that there's some kind of force that started all this, and then he's transcendent and he's sort of gone away and left everything to work naturally. So, but we've pretty much removed deism in our day, and so naturalism reigns here in the first story. And what's happened since Darwin's Origin of the Species is the supernatural has been moved to the second story. And so in the public square, anything that goes in the second story really is considered myth or privatized or canceled. And so, what we have is we have this dominating naturalistic view. And it's not just naturalistic, it's materialistic, meaning that the material is all there is. So mankind doesn't even have a soul. Most universities in the science departments and in public schools in the science departments, they see us as just material beings with no soul. And so there's no spiritual element. If there is a spiritual element, that's up to you, but that's privatized, and don't bring that into the public square and don't bring that into the first story. We're going to live in the first story. Okay? So that's materialism. And then the crass form of that is called scientism. And scientism is the teaching or belief that the only thing we can prove is true, objectively true, is it has to be observed scientifically. So you have to use the scientific method. Okay, so again, there are in the public square, in the universities and the public schools in America and in Europe and so forth, I have 4 books written by, or 3 books that are specifically on this topic, written by, what's his name? Jerry Bergman. And Jerry Bergman is a scientist, and he was kicked out of Wayne State University in Detroit for just alluding to intelligent design in a scientific paper. And so he wrote 3 books documenting all these people that have been kicked out. He especially focuses on high-level scientists. They're teaching at the university, or they're working for a museum, or some type of scientific think tank. And so I have 3 of his books where he just documents these people and how they got ousted from their positions. And so, when we come to this chapter on creation, this is a huge topic, not just in the sense of what the Bible teaches about it, but what does the world teach about it, and what kind of, there's a major conflict going on, because we as Christians hold to the starting point for creation, in the beginning, God. So we immediately say that everything started with the supernatural. And so if you don't have God in your premise, then whatever follows is likely to be false as well. So they start without God, and anything that's scientific has to be explained naturalistically. As a matter of fact, it's not even an option to have God in the picture in our day and age. So, but this is really since Darwin's Origin of the Species in 1859. Okay, so where we're at is we're sort of, people mock us. They think we're nuts. They think that the creation story in Adam and Eve and all is a myth. And come on, talking snakes and floods, and they just think all that is just craziness. And again, for me, I look at the materialism and the scientism and the naturalism, and I think evolution is craziness. Okay, so again, there's a debate in this, but this debate has to be off-site in most places now, because you can't even get on a public school campus or a university to even debate this. It's so canceled, it's so ostracized. So here we are in a church, and God willing, who knows how long that's going to last, how long we're going to have freedom to do this even in churches. But the reality is, you see in politics, you see in, even with classic literature, there's a lot of literature that's being canceled because it alludes to the Bible. And so most of the classics that we read growing up in school, that was required reading, you don't even read in school anymore, because if there's any allusion to Scripture or biblical Judeo values, it's been canceled. It's been, and then history is revised and so forth. Okay, so here's what I think when it comes to science for Christians today. I think the majority of the scientists have pressure to somehow buy into as much of modern science as they possibly can in order to keep their jobs and have a living. And it's a lot like the mandates that we got for vaccines and masks and so forth. I don't think it's very much different at all. It's not, is it true? Does it work? Anything. It's just who are the power people? Where's the money? Follow the power. And in science, the power and the money is funded by all totally buy into evolutionistic theory, and they say it's fact. But in all my studies so far, I have yet to find anything in evolution, macroevolution, okay? One kind becoming another kind, or one species becoming another species, not change within species. I think we all agree with microevolution. We all recognize that. But for a single cell organism to evolve into everything that exists, I hope you struggle with that, as I do. That to me is just an incredible stretch, and just a pretty lame theory as far as I'm concerned.
Let alone just dead materials forming a single cell organism.
Right. Yeah, and again, anything material, like even our talking, and you guys are thinking, and there's a conscience going on, you're thinking about this, and it's sort of in the abstract, inside your mind. How does anything material do any of that? And so there's I just think there's so many problems. But here's what I'm going to say is, so Grudem takes the old earth view in this, and again, this is not an issue, like if Wayne Grudem lived here and he wanted to come to our church, I'd love to have him in our church, okay? I'd let him teach, but it'd be fun to debate on this. I'd take the young earth position and debate him, and it'd be fun. I think it'd be fun, and he's a nice guy. He's not going to beat me up or anything. But he holds to that, and I hold to the young earth position. And so as we go through Genesis in the coming years, or it's going to take us a few years to get through Genesis, I'm going to tackle a lot of the issues related to creation and evolution, and I'm going to defend a young earth view. But I'm also going to tackle all the other views and show the pros and cons of those views as well. And I have to also say, I'm not a scientist. So I'm primarily looking at this. When I look at this issue, I'm looking at the Bible and science. And I lean towards trying to say, how can I explain science based on what the Bible teaches? So I actually have preference of the Bible over science. Now, what he says in the book, and I think he's right, is that when all the facts are in between what's true about science and what's true in the Bible, there will be no final conflict. And I believe that. But I also believe that that's probably not going to happen in our lifetimes, until we go to heaven and God tells us exactly how this works. Because we weren't there. And so it's hard. We have the information we have, the data we have, but we weren't there. But the scientists have the premise that things need to be billions of years old, because it helps to tack on all these billions of years to say it took that much time for these things to happen. And I think that's a cop-out. Yeah. I really think that's a cop-out. And even when they date rocks and so forth, they're assuming naturalism and they're assuming evolution is true. So the dating isn't based on actual age. The dating is based on the premise that this has to be this old. And then all the ages, if you're taking from astronomy, the earth, geology, and everything, all the ages don't match up anyway. So they have old earth people have just as big a problem as we do saying there's a young earth. As a matter of fact, I think they have a bigger problem, because at least we're totally consistent. Mm-hmm. And then for me, the bottom line is I've experienced miracles. You guys have heard about miracles I've experienced, and some of you have experienced miracles as well. And there's no naturalistic explanation for miracles. A miracle is a supernatural activity of God where he intervenes in reality. And so when I saw somebody's arm grow back in India, a naturalist can't explain that. A naturalist, if you're just a pure naturalist, you say miracles can't happen, you're just not going to believe that no matter what. Even if you're there, you're going to say it was magic, it was a hallucination, whatever. They're going to have all these different things. But for me, I saw a guy's arm grow back, but I know God can do that. And when we read our Bibles, we see that God intervenes miraculously all the time.
That's the thing that changed you from being a cessationist?
Yeah.
At that moment?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You were a hardcore cessationist.
I don't know if I was hardcore, but I was a cessationist. I mean, I was very skeptical. And especially that anybody had the gift of healing. But the guy I was with, I saw him do 2 healings within a matter of hours that were obviously supernatural. Amazingly supernatural. So again, so for me, when I look at everything that exists, and it makes sense because God's outside time. I mean, that saying that John MacArthur is, how does that go? That he's outside of time, he's outside of space, matter, all that.
Well, you talked about the beginning of Genesis.
Yeah.
That how basically anything that exists in time, force, action, space, and matter. And he says, and when you read the first chapter or first verse of Genesis, it says, "In the beginning, that's time. God, that's force.
Yeah.
Created, that's action. The heavens, that's space, and the earth, that's matter."
Yeah. And I have the direct quote in his book In the Beginning, and also in his commentary on Genesis 1-11, MacArthur. So I'm going to use that when I go through Genesis, because I think that's just really good. And I want everybody to have the actual quote, because it's really good. But he quotes, I think it's a scientist by the name of Spencer. Something Spencer is the guy's name. Yeah. But that's really good. So for me, when I look at Adam and Eve, obviously Adam and Eve were created with age. They weren't babies, because babies can't take care of themselves. So if they're the first humans, they have to be adults so they can take care of themselves. They also have to be able to eat something. So there has to be mature plants and fruits and whatever they were eating in order to survive. So God obviously creates with age. We see that in the New Testament. The very first miracle Jesus does turns water into wine. And anybody who knows anything about wine, typically the best wines are aged wines. And so at the party, at the wedding party, they say, wow, he saved the best for last. Usually you'd save the worst for last because everybody's drunk. And so look, why serve them the good stuff they don't even know anyway? But Jesus serves the best stuff. And that would mean that he makes it as if it tastes like, wow, this is aged, really good wine. But God can do that. It's no problem for God to do that. And so again, the atheist, I think it takes more faith to be an atheist. That's why I love that book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Geisler and Turek. And right now I'm reading Frank Turek's book. What's it called? Basically, he's talking about how atheists have to borrow from God in order to make their... it's called Stealing from God. But Frank Turek, and so I just started reading that, and it's really good so far. But he's using all these examples of the new atheists and how they actually borrow from God to make their arguments. They can't even make arguments unless, especially if they're talking about morals or right and wrong, evil and good, and so forth. Okay. So any questions on this or any just comments? And I'm just wondering, where you guys are coming from. And again, there's some good arguments with old Earth. Scott and I were talking about this the other day, and I held to old Earth for a while. But again, the more I've read, especially a lot of young Earth guys, because I think the young Earth guys have been sort of squeezed out of the conversation. Even the new books that are coming out, they don't even involve. They'll have a theistic evolutionist, they'll have an intelligent design guy, and then they'll have an old Earth guy, and they don't even have a young Earth guy in there. They're really being squeezed out, even in Christian circles, and I think that's just that's tragic. Because again, in the history of the church, until Darwin wrote Origin of the Species, and again, Origin of the Species is actually I think if it came out now, there'd be so many problems with it in comparison with modern science, because Darwin didn't know about DNA and the complexity of cells and all that kind of stuff, and fossil. He said basically it's dead in the water if we don't find transitional fossils. Well, we've found thousands of fossils since then. There's still no transitional fossils. Yeah. So, yeah. So we'll get into that. Yeah, Mo.
Well, I guess one thing I wanted to say on the young Earth argument, I think Answers in Genesis had like an article back in like 2004. This I read when I was like a kid, and they did a phenomenal presentation, like showcasing all the evidence that Earth, though it appears to be 4.5 billion years, that it never experienced those years, right? And the analogy I kind of try to use
that's
Adam
good.
and Eve is that Adam and Eve, when God spontaneously generated them, I've probably mentioned this to you guys before, that they didn't have like hangnails, they didn't have lice, they didn't have like pimples or like cuts, bruises, missing a limb. There is no lice. There's no evidence that they experienced the 30 years in which, I guess what we understand them to be adults, average. There is no evidence that they had experienced the time in which God spontaneously created them. And so in the same sense, when you look at the universe and you look at Earth, if you don't, like the level of sodium that's in the water, it doesn't, complement that of a 4.5 billion year model.
Yeah.
Lack of seafloor strata, the supernova remnants, the lack of supernova remnants that we see, because once a star reaches a supernova, if the universe was as old as they claim it to be, we would observe an immense amount, but the amount that we actually observe is very little. The same as when carbon 14 decays into nitrogen 14, there's not enough observable nitrogen 14 that supports a 4.5 billion year model. I think they did a study in the 50s when they were measuring the nitrogen 14. They thought that their equipment was faulty, and they like, oh no, something's wrong with our equipment. It's too low. There's no way that but because their premise was that the Earth was old,
right?
And every time you observe like aspects of the world like that, it shows that though it appears to be old, it didn't actually live through that.
Yeah. And it's interesting, even Mount St. Helens, I haven't been there, but I've seen footage of Mount St. Helens now, and it appears very old. I mean, even since the volcanic eruption, it's amazing how much everything's been restored and trees have grown and, you know, and on and on. So there's a lot of work done by, especially by geologists that are young Earth creationists who have really good, I mean, just really good work and a lot of, I think, good evidence that counters the evolutionary premises. So, and I just think that goes for everything that you talk about. Probably the most difficult thing is astronomy, you know, because you look at light years and so forth. But again, I think when you study some of the Christian young Earth astronomers, they have good arguments, and we'll get into those as we move forward. Before we dive into the book, I did want to point out, I passed this out to you, and if you're watching on video, we'll have this available. You can print it out, but it's Why We Believe in Creation by Dr. Ray Bolin. It's a really good argument where he just sort of makes a case, just a quick case against theistic evolution. And it's just a quick read. It's not super technical, but he's a guy who has a BS in zoology and an MS and PhD in molecular biology, and he's a young Earth guy. And he works with Ken Boa, who's a top-notch Christian apologist and writer. So again, as we go through Genesis, I'm going to have a lot of material to hand out, but this is just a good article. So keep a file that you can just throw all this stuff in, because there's going to be a lot of stuff I'm going to be giving you. Okay, well, let's go ahead and dive into creation. And we're on page 59. And first of all, the doctrine of creation. What is the definition of the doctrine of creation? Just anybody loudly.
God created the entire universe out of nothing. It was originally very good, and he created it to glorify himself.
Okay. And again, immediately you see two things at least, well, three things leap out to me. Is first of all, the fact that there's this, as the Bible describes God, makes sense of how everything is here. It also means that there's purpose, because he made this to glorify himself. So we have purpose. We're not just slime going, we're not from slime going to slime and so life. And then I just love the fact that everything was originally very good. And so a lot of the problems that, you know, like so-called vestigial organs, like what Jerry Bergman has 2 books on vestigial organs. And as somebody who's an expert in anatomy, he says there are no vestigial organs, that everything that we call vestigial organs actually has a use. And as we study these things, like tonsils and the appendix and everything, they all have uses, and in some cases have many uses. So there's not a single thing that we have. Even the tailbone is essential because it sustains and upholds important muscles that we have back there. So it's not from a remnant from the fact that we had a tail, because a tail would be very helpful. I mean, you know, if we could be putting up Christmas lights or whatever and have our tail, you know, holding us up and use both hands instead of having to hang on. I mean, that could be helpful. You know, I mean, there's a lot of ways it can be, but God he didn't design us that way. So, but again, it seems to me, and Bergman's case, that we're actually over-designed. For instance, we have 2 kidneys. You know, we have, you know, evolution can't explain that. How we can actually have backup for several important organs in our bodies, and how we can lose the function of a lot of things and still have tremendous functionality. I mean, you look at blind people, you look at people without limbs, legs, and I mean, that one guy who has no arms and leg, what's that guy's name? What's it? Something, Nick? Yeah, it starts with a V. That guy's amazing. I mean, he does more than all of us with limbs. You know, I mean, it's, you know, so it's just.
He's starting the pro-life bank.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I met him a couple times at Calvary.
Oh, really?
He's always there.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, he's a great guy. I mean, man, what an example. And Johnny Erickson Tata, I mean, another person that's just an amazing example. But again, it's amazing how God designed us, that even though we can lose a lot of things, how well we can still function, and all the backup that God gives us on top of it. So Jerry Bergman makes the case for the fact that we're over-designed. And I'm going to do a whole thing on that. Yeah.
And I find it so interesting that they claim, evolutionists claim that how we came to be was a series of good mutations, which is what they can only claim for us to be progressing.
Right.
But then the tail, as you mentioned, is so much beneficial to us.
Right.
Why would that be excessive, you know?
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, good point. Okay, number 2. Ex nihilo. Okay, do I have a Latin? Yeah, I do. I have Latin today. Sola fide, faith alone, from the Reformation. Ex nihilo, another Latin term. What does that mean? Out of nothing. So again, for somebody who just believes in the existence of God, it's not a problem for us. Age and miracles, it's no problem for us. And the reality is, if you've been a Christian very long, you've prayed for something, and you see God answer prayer, and the only thing you can say is that was supernatural. You can't explain it naturally, and we've all had those experiences. And I feel sorry for all the people that don't have that, or have it and just are in denial over it or whatever, that it's just coincidence or what have you. But again, the longer you're a Christian, the more you pray and the more you trust God, I think the more you see Him work and the more you see the supernatural all around you. Number 3, the phrase the heavens and the earth includes what? The entire universe. Okay, and we saw that in Psalm 33, 6 and 9. True or false? The Bible teaches that God created Adam and Eve in a special and personal way. Yeah, true. And I love that story of, you've got Adam naming all the animals, and then I use this in weddings all the time. When I do a wedding, and I just think to me it's funny because he's naming all these animals, and then he doesn't see anything that's compatible to him. And then when he sees the woman, the Hebrew is an exclamation. Where he's just like, wow, and so he sees this woman that is for him, designed for him, and yet I just love how God took that rib from man and fashioned this woman, and I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think I think it's tragic the way marriage and sex and the sex act has been so twisted in culture, because I think in the context of marriage, it's a beautiful thing, and it's a special thing. It's a beautiful thing, and God designed it that way. And you look at how the enemy just always makes everything ugly and chaotic and destructive. Okay, number 5. How is God distinct from His creation? So anything that stood out to you and how God is distinct from His creation?
He made it and He rules over it?
Yeah. Yeah, so...
He's not a part of it either. He's independent of it.
Good.
He's transcendent.
Yeah.
Above it and beyond it.
Good. It's interesting. I'm reading a book with my best friend. We're going to discuss it at the end of the month, called The Dust of Death by Os Guinness. And he wrote it I think he wrote it in 1969 or 70, but he's talking about everything that's going on in the 60s, and he's got 2 chapters on drugs. It was really interesting reading it, though, because I look at how that has shaped a lot of our leaders. I mean, a lot of our political leaders, a lot of Marin County there's more Buddhists than Christians here. And Buddhism is Eastern. I mean, it's Eastern thinking and Hinduism. And so it's the whole New Age thing, the pantheism thing, and all is one. And you're trying to Timothy Leary stuff from Harvard, where he's doing LSD. And it's just really interesting reading all that and seeing where that's taken us. And it's actually tragic, but you could see where that started in America heavily was in the 60s. And obviously we live in the Bay Area, which is probably one of the areas where that impacted a geographic region more than any place in the country. But we're surrounded by people that have there are more people that have Eastern thinking where we live than Western thinking. And that is that the material is evil. And yet it says that God made it and it was good. And so you're trying to basically deconstruct everything that God made. And that's what liberals do. That's what liberalism does. Liberalism deconstructs whatever God made that was good. And whether it's political, religious, you name it. I mean, it's a deconstruction of God's design. Very interesting, but it's amazing how much drugs had to do with that.
God's design, so they can reconstruct it into Satan's design.
Yeah. Okay, number 6, we were to define transcendence and immanence. So when we're talking about the transcendence of God, what does that mean?
It's the same thing as independence, isn't it? He's greater than, he exists above it,
Yeah,
outside of it.
yeah. Yeah, beyond it, above it, greater than it, and on and on. Yes, good. And then immanence, God's immanence reflects what?
That God is involved,
Yeah.
interested in, and remaining in his creation.
Yeah. And that would be, I'm so glad there's so much history where you see that happening in the Bible, and there's history beyond the Bible where you see God's providential working. And then there's prophecy where we know that things are going to work out. Because it'd be horrible if we didn't know. If we didn't know the end, and we didn't know the prophecies that are coming, it'd be really hard to live in the now because it looks pretty bad. But again, we know that God's going to redeem and God's going to restore. And so there's still many people that God's going to redeem, and then God's going to restore all people, either for judgment or glory, and he's also going to restore everything he made. And so we're going to get to see the beauty that Adam and Eve got to behold before the fall. That's going to be awesome. I mean, that's just going to be incredible. And by the way, there's an interesting, if you can get a hold of it, it's by Ken Myers, but he did a talk, and I've looked for it on the internet. Mo could probably find this. But it's Ken Myers, and he's got a ministry where he sort of talks about culture and then integrates that with theology. And I don't even know if he's still alive, but I heard this in the 80s, and I had a tape of it, and I lent it to somebody. But even though they never gave it back to me, I couldn't play it anyway because I don't even have a cassette player anymore. But it was a great cassette, and the whole thing, it was an hour-long lecture on the transcendence of God and how the transcendence of God has almost disappeared in culture, especially in the public square, and how that started was through architecture. And so what he does is he traces from Darwinism and the acceptance of evolution. You had in the center of almost any city, whether it was London, Paris, New York, anywhere in the world, the main cities, the big cities, and then all the towns, the highest building was always a church. But after Origin of the Species was written, commerce buildings started dwarfing the churches. And the churches, especially after World War I and World War II in Europe, for instance, are now just largely museums. They're beautiful cathedrals that you get, if any of you have been there, they're spectacular. But it's sad to think that those places used to be a place where Bach was played and choirs were singing to the glory of God.
Worse than that, I was working on tour in Europe,
Uh-huh.
and I was in, I think it was Dortmund.
Mm-hmm.
There's this beautiful old cathedral, and it's a nightclub.
Wow. Wow.
There's a church in the city that I would drive past all the time when I worked for Cruise, and it really upset me because at first it turned into like a roller skate thing, and I was like, oh, come on, like that's sad that the congregation fell, and then now it's just like a roller skate thing.
Yeah.
But then there was this guy, and there were kids coming in and out, and he had the tightest pants ever. You see a full outline of his crotch. Like everything, like genitalia completely, and there's children walking past him, and he's like putting bracelets on their wrist. I was like, yo, I'm gonna get out of this car. Yeah. So that's what they got going on in the city.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful
It's really sad. But again, so the transcendence of God, and we've talked about this at different times, that when you go out in creation, for some reason, I think it's because you're seeing what God has made. Whereas when you're in a city, you're primarily seeing what man has made, or what man has destroyed, whichever way you want to look at it. As a matter of fact, C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien, one of the reasons their works are so popular, especially if you read their works, they saw this. Their books, if you asked either Tolkien or Lewis, and I've read them both respond to questions about industrialization. And they both said that the biggest danger of industrialization is that you replace God with something else. And they saw that just in manufacturing and industrialization. And C.S. Lewis, for instance, never drove a car. He thought that the development of cars really took away from community. And he was right. You know, but it's really interesting. But if you read Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, those works, and you read a lot of Lewis, you'll see that a lot of what they were doing was they were saying the transcendence of God is being taken over by man and man's achievements, and diminishing who God is and his achievements. And it's really an amazing thing to see that they were seeing that 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy because like most people aren't as familiar with the history of the Freemasons, which like the Free Stone Masons. Why they have that like protractor is the Free Stone Masons got a lot of their ideology from the Knights Templars, who they believed that the closest thing to getting to godliness is the building from stone, and like so their goal was to build these higher buildings, like to kind of outshine God. It's kind of like Babylon.
Yeah. No, interesting. So again, I mean, if any of you ever find that though, Ken Myers, just type it in, look it up. Maybe somebody will find it, because I found like obscure stuff that I used to listen to at different points on the internet, but because I used to have I go back to 8-track tapes, 8-track tapes and cassette tapes, and so all that stuff is it's gone now, but there's still a lot of good stuff back then. Okay, let's go to number 7. Describe pantheism and how it differs from the biblical view of creation. So in its simplest form, he gave a very short definition of pantheism. What did he say?
Everything is God.
Yeah, everything is God or a part of God, right? And so again, that's Eastern, Hinduism, Buddhism, essentially, even yoga can be very dangerous. Because the philosophy behind it and the religion behind it actually taps into the demonic. And a lot of people don't realize that, but you really have to be careful, especially living in an area like we do, where there's a lot of syncretism from ideas that are actually satanic. And so before you get involved in almost anything that involves meditation or even yoga or any kind of exercise or martial arts. I mean, you guys have been involved in the martial arts. Some of that definitely has religious overtones into the Eastern realm, and so we just need to watch for that.
You see the yin-yang symbol, or in Korean they call it um-yang symbol, the balance of opposites, and one of the things they talk about with that is that it's good and evil.
Yeah.
And the premise that evil is equal to good is...
And that's dualism, which is the next point. Yeah. But yeah, that's right. And that's what Star Wars is. Star Wars sort of is probably the biggest popularizer of that view, of dualism. So, yeah. Okay, so yeah, we already talked about dualism. How about deism? What's deism under number 8?
That God created the universe, but is no longer involved in it.
Yes.
Which denies his lordship over it.
Yeah. So who's the most famous American that taught that? Believed that and taught that?
Thomas Jefferson.
Jefferson and Franklin. Yeah, both pretty famous and great guys. I prefer a deist over a materialistic naturalist any day. But yeah, they started getting away. And again, that was a big part. They were before Darwin, but again, you could already see some naturalism taking place. With Edwards, Edwards lived in the 1700s. Franklin was a contemporary of him in the 1700s. And already in the colonies, before we even came to the United States, you've already got deism landing and taking off and getting away from a supernatural God that's involved in creation. And then you look at where we are now today, Okay, what does creation primarily show us about God?
My handwriting is terrible, but I wrote God's glory, his power and wisdom to take delight in his creation.
Yeah. Now, when you think about that, his glory, his power and wisdom, what stands out to you, for you personally, any of you, when you see creation or when you think about creation? Or is there any aspect of creation. Because all the early scientists, I mean, you take Isaac Newton, I mean, you just go through the list of all the early inventors of everything that we study now, and they did it for the glory of God. They did it the same way a theologian would study theology, is to bring glory to God. But modern liberal theology and modern science, God's not even in the picture, which is incredibly tragic, since he's the one who invented science. He's the one who gave us something to study that's scientific. But anyway, what stands out to any of you as far as creation goes that just makes you marvel at the glory of God?
The perfection of it,
The what?
The perfection of it, the
Okay.
mathematical.
Yeah.
perfection of it.
Yeah.
It's it's exact, it's precise, it's really infinite.
Yeah.
And so the more you learn, the more you see how perfect it is,
Good.
and order to the universe.
Yeah.
From a creator.
Yeah. Good.
And there's so many aspects of it that are too convenient for it just to be,
Right.
naturally. Like most people, I guess most people do know, but maybe they don't, that the sun is actually closer to Earth during winter. That it's actually further during summer. It's just the axial tilt is at the right amount that the light rays hit us at a certain position that it, tends to make it
Yeah.
cooler because the poles and the position of the poles away from the sun, and
Yeah.
even the distance between the Earth and the Moon, the sun and the moon,
Yeah.
even Mars even affects our moon to some degree. There's so many things. It's just so convenient. It's
Yeah.
If this was off by a little bit,
Yeah.
and all that happened by itself.
Yeah. We had one of my favorite professors when I was in Bible college. His name was David Needham, and he's written a few books. One's called Close to His Majesty, which is on the attributes of God, and you could still get it, but really good book. But he would have several assignments throughout the semester. It was in Portland, Oregon, so he was a very avid astronomer. He was part of an astronomy club. And he was one of the few Christians in the club, but he knew a lot about astronomy, and he had a really incredible telescope. And so he'd have us come in groups of 5 at different nights of the week, and he'd explain to us everything through the telescope, and he would talk about it. But one of the amazing things is just Hugh Ross, even though he's an old earther, he's a Christian astronomer, so he would agree, he would be right on with Grudem here. But he has several books that just talk about hundreds of evidences of the fine-tuning of the earth and the universe and why we could even have life here. But he talks about it from a scientist's perspective, and it's really fascinating. So a lot of the things like you just said, but hundreds of them. Yeah. And again, how and then he uses mathematics, because astronomers are usually really good mathematicians and have to be, to show the improbability of how any of this could come about by chance, which is nothing, So, yeah, cool. Okay, fill in the blanks. When all the facts are correctly understood, there will be no final conflict between Scripture and natural science. And I thought that was really good. He got that from Schaeffer, and then Schaeffer showed some things that are conflicts, apparent conflicts now, but how those things ultimately will be worked out, because all truth is God's truth, right? Okay, number 11. What are some different ways the word evolution is used? So what are the two micro and macro. And again, microevolution would be what?
Changes within a kind.
Yeah, small developments within species. And again, even younger, all young Earth people like myself also agree with that too. So there's no disagreement really on that. The disagreement comes on the other kind of evolution, which is called what? Macroevolution. And macroevolution, does anybody think they can explain it, in a few sentences, Okay, go ahead.
Well, micro, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
is like small biological changes, like the fact that none of us look alike, but then macro is that there's a major change of kind.
Right.
So you're coming from a dog, becoming a sheep, becoming
Right.
whatnot. And so mean, they claim microevolutionary means lead to macro as well, but essentially there's no evidence.
There's no evidence for it, yeah,
Major
right.
Dramatic change of kind.
Right, yeah, yeah. And interesting, again, I'd encourage all of you, if you ever get a chance, to go see the Ark in Kentucky. It's pretty amazing, pretty spectacular. But it's really interesting because they have a lot of just good stuff that you read and artwork and videos and everything, but it's pretty fascinating because when they talk about kinds, for instance, a lot of people think, like, they think lions and tigers and jaguars and all this were on the ark. No, there was a cat, some kind of cat from which all the types of cats came from. So there's one kind of cat, there's one kind of dog from which all the dogs. And actually most evolutionists, a lot of evolutionists will agree with that. But they go beyond that to then becoming other species, or these species coming from other species before that. And I think you actually can prove within the data of fossils and with the flood and so forth that there were actually, somewhere around 7,000 species or kinds. And then out of that have come all the various birds and all the various fish and what have you. So,
even in the last 100 years, we've ourselves bred over 150 different types of dogs.
Yeah. But you still need intelligence to do that. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Again, they can't create, you get all the best scientists and all the best technology, they still can't create a single cell. They can't do anything other than take existing stuff. They can't do creation ex nihilo. Only God can do that. And then we take what God has made and we think we're so great, but God's already given us the stuff.
Well, actually, there was I'm really forgetting who it was that did this, but it was like a study where they were trying to prove evolution, happened or whatnot. And the funniest part of it is they were the ones that were influencing it.
Right.
So it's like, see, here's evidence that this right here can come from that.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, but that wouldn't have existed if you didn't introduce those things to each other.
Right. It took there had to be intelligence.
Yeah.
And they had to have materials to work with.
There's deception in some of the skeletons that they supposedly found, like Lucy, was it Australopithecus africanus or something?
Right. Boy, you said that really well.
But they found some bones over here and found some bones over there and kept putting them together until they came up with actually something that some other people argue it looks like a particular type of monkey that's known.
Yeah.
They claim that it's, I don't know what the orbital bones around the eyes and like that it's this transitional form. Coincidentally, and I know this because a friend of mine met him at the Bohemian Club, the guy that found Lucy, the scientist, is a member of the Bohemian Grove.
That's not too surprising.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah.
So demonic influence,
Right.
to perpetuate or perpetrate a lie.
Yeah. And it's interesting. A guy that's really fun to read on that is Jonathan Wells. He was at Berkeley, and he is a Christian. But before he became a Christian, he was an evolutionist, and he decided to do a lot of research on. Especially everything in textbook, like Haeckel's drawings and Lucy and all these different things. So he's got a book called Icons of Evolution, where he tackles like all this stuff that's still in all the textbooks, and yet they've all been disproven as frauds. They're all fraudulent, and it usually is like a chip of a skull or whatever, and then they build this whole thing around it based on their premise of materialism. And so, but he's got another book, a follow-up book called Zombie Science. And then he's got another book called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Science. And but what he does in all those books is he just delineates all the facts about all the frauds that still continue to be perpetuated in the textbooks. And it's fun to read and see that. Okay, number 12. Our culture is exceptional and even unique by any standard of the animal kingdom. And again, you just look at You compare us with any animal, and there's no comparison. Now, some people, there's not too much of a difference, but in general, the intelligence of a human being as opposed to an animal, or what we can do, and building things and creating culture and art and music and all that kind of stuff, there's no comparison. For something to be pure creation, it needs to begin what? From nothing. And then theistic evolution. So what was the definition of theistic evolution? I was on page 366.
God created matter and did not intervene to cause change in matter.
Yeah.
Until all things had evolved by natural process. I don't know if that's right or not.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, good.
I found
Yeah.
that Grudem, the way he wrote that chapter in that section was confusing, because he first talked about it being guided by God, theistic evolution, and then he quickly then says it's not guided by God.
Yeah.
And then later he goes into a definition of what guided means.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
so the theistic evolutionists believe that God guided the evolutionary process, or didn't?
Yeah, I think you're right, because there's theistic evolutionists that hold to both.
I see.
But the issue is, and here's the issue with the problem with theistic evolution. I mean, evolutionists don't like theistic evolutionists. So even theistic evolutionists are ostracized from the first story. So people like Francis Collins, who he's a theistic evolutionist, and he claims to be a Christian. I don't know. I don't know him. I have yet to read his book that shares his testimony. I know he's buddies with Tim Keller, but I have just huge problems with theistic evolution. So I'm gonna be attacking evolution, but pretty much whenever I'm attacking evolution, I'm attacking theistic evolution, because there is a discrepancy among even theistic evolutionists. Because if you read most theists, or the theistic evolutionists I've read thus far, they sound like deists. It's like God's not really involved. So God's still transcendent and he's not immanent. But I think, again, there's a pool for those scientists to be accepted and to have tenure in their universities and get funding to support or substantiate science. But then you've got real problems with how you interpret the Bible. And so, me, that's the biggest thing, is if you have to make the Bible super complicated in its interpretation, that in and of itself is a red flag to me. And the young earth people, as far as I'm concerned, the young earth and the old earth can make much better sense of, they don't have to do as many gymnastics, and in my opinion, the young earth people do the least amount of gymnastics. And so I think the plain and simple reading of Genesis is the way it is. I mean, I take it at face value, and I think there's plenty of science that backs that up, and I'm going to seek to prove that in days ahead. But yeah, you're right, Scott. It is confusing, because it's hard to say how is God involved in that, because again, they're really trying to primarily explain it completely materialistically and naturally, and so it's like, why do you even need God if that can happen? Then why do you even need God in the first place? And that's why the evolutionists don't like the theistic evolutionists, because they're saying basically you've got a gap here, you've got a problem here, so you throw God in the mix to cover you, so to say. So what's interesting, this is interesting to me too, is it's sort of like with the issue of apologetics. I think we talked about this a few weeks back, that I tend to lean classical apologetics. And so if you look at presuppositionalists, and you look at evidentialists, and you look at classical apologists, the people that I know of that are evidentialists and classical have led way more people to Christ, or influenced people for Christ, more than the presuppositionalists. And I think that's interesting. On the same vein, I think the young earth people have done more for evangelism than any of the views of any of the positions. And the ones that have done the least in reaching the lost are theistic evolutionists. So it's like that they say that's what motivates them, is we don't want to have this big gap between what they believe and what we believe, so we believe what they believe so we can reach them. But reality, it doesn't work. Progressive Christianity is the same way, you know, where homosexuality is accepted by churches or whatever. But when you do that, you don't really reach them. What happens, it brings the whole church down to their level instead of bringing them up to the level of Christ. So I just think whenever you get away from anything that's objectively true, it leads to a lot of problems. Okay, what does very good in the eyes of the holy God imply?
Without sin.
Okay, yeah, without sin.
No previous evil in the
Yeah,
universe or on the earth.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so no sin, no evil. So it's really an idyllic setting that Adam and Eve are placed in.
Yeah, actually, he wrote that it implies the absence of sin in the world. I would say it demands it in the eyes of the holy God.
Yeah, that's good.
I thought he should have used a stronger word.
Okay. All right.
You know Arthur Pink,
Yeah.
his exposition on Genesis,
Yeah,
he thinks between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2.
there's a gap.
Well,
He also a gap, right?
There's a gap,
Yeah.
but there is sin.
Okay.
There was sin in,
So he's talking about the fall of Satan.
yeah, I guess presumably.
Well, because Satan obviously did fall before Adam and Eve because he came to tempt them.
Yeah,
So he was already in a state of sin.
right.
And yeah, that is a view that people who hold to the gap theory hold to. Yeah.
It would have had to have happened after God declared it all very good.
Right.
Yeah. Again, it's going to be fun to hear it from Jesus himself as how this all worked. All right, how does Romans 1 show the significance of what people believe about God based on creation?
This is amazing.
Yeah.
This is definition of this. So he says the evidence from creation for God's existence is so overwhelming that God holds people morally accountable for denying it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah, that's intense.
Yeah, it's interesting to read it in the Latin because it uses the term for, clearly manifest in English. In Latin, it's manifestum. And apparently that term manifestum carries a lot of weight in the Latin, which means that it's so clear that nobody could possibly miss it. It'd be like if I had a bazooka in here and set it off, I'd shot it and said, "Did you hear that?" It's like, did we hear it? We lost our hearing for that stupid thing. It was so loud. I mean, it's just, there's no way you could get around the reality of what just happened. And that is the truth that, and I think it's interesting that the Romans argument that Paul uses, he said that there's no intellectual argument that can be given to God. The reason they deny God or they suppress the truth about God is it's a moral issue.
Yeah.
They want to sin. They don't want to be under the authority of a holy God. And so it's just good to know. It's good to know that whenever you talk to a non-believer, it's not really an intellectual. Now, they might have legitimate questions and legitimate objections, but ultimately what you need to get to is you need to get to the fact that they're a sinner. It's their sin that keeps them from believing in God. It's not an intellectual thing, it's a moral thing. And so it's important that we understand that in pre-evangelism and throughout our presentation of reasons.
I talked
And
about that in a sermon when I was out of town, and my wife called and she said, "He said something in the sermon," which was that just was it just clarified so much for her. She said it was she just was rejoicing over it. It really lit a light for her.
Cool.
Yeah, loved it.
Good. You look like you wanted to say something, or you're just agreeing.
Oh, no, sorry, I was
Yeah.
touching my hair. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I wish I had hair to touch. That'd be
sorry.
cool.
Now that people aren't watching on camera are going to watch. Come on.
Okay, show me your hair.
See, now we have a record.
That's great.
20 years from
That's great. Okay. True or false, there are gaps in the biblical genealogies.
True.
Okay, yeah. And it's interesting, when I was at the Ark, I saw this huge, they have it on a wall there. It's probably like 40 feet long. And so I bought it. You can actually buy it, and it folds up. So it's this book that's like, if any of you come to my house, I'll show it to you. It's about this high. I'll bring it for show and tell sometime. But I could actually lay it, I think it might be too long to lay out, but maybe I could somehow lay it in the hall or something. But it's based on Ussher's chronology, which is 4,004 years. But it's just really interesting. It's really interesting to look at it because there's an incredible amount of history and documentation that the Earth and the history of the people of the Earth is very young. You know, as far as what we actually have, the data we actually have that's not based on theory. The evidence of history and so forth is actually very young.
That scientist that's come up with that he wrote the book using genetics.
Yeah, that's John. That's Jensen.
Yeah, Jensen.
Nathan Jensen. Yeah.
Mind-boggling.
Yeah, Traced is his newest book.
Traced,
Yeah.
and then the newer one is Deconstructing Darwin or something like that.
Yeah, I don't even know. Yeah. But he's good. Yeah, he's good. And he went to Harvard. You know, I mean, he was just in the trenches, but came out young Earth, which is pretty amazing.
He discovered some sort of a genetic anomaly of errors in people's genes.
Yeah.
It's very consistent generation to generation.
Yeah.
That there's usually 3.
Yeah.
And then they can see how far the genes go back in a particular person and their genetic line and where you came from and all this. It's really fascinating. A lot of it was over my head, but it was really interesting.
Yeah, he's one of the guys I read. By the way, I sent you guys, did you guys get the email I sent out? Mm-hmm. That has this article, but it also has 17 pages of resources on Genesis. And if you didn't get it, let me know. Text me or email me that you didn't get it, because sometimes I just send all this stuff out. I don't have like a mass email, so I try to remember everybody's in this class and send it to you. But if you didn't get it, let me know, and I'll make sure you get it. All right. What is the concordist or day-age view of Genesis?
So you mentioned that the Earth is millions of years old, and that the days in Genesis 1 are millions of years or a very long periods of time?
Yeah, so I think they date the Earth at like 4 million, and then the universe at like 14.8 or something like that is the day age. Yeah. But yeah, that's that view. And again, when we start Genesis, I'm going to do a whole thing on each of the main views that people hold to. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of those views. How about the framework view of Genesis 1? What's the essence of that?
The days are not literal days.
Yeah.
And it's not chronological.
Right.
But a literary framework
for
God's creation.
Yeah, so days 1 to 3 is the forming, and then days 4 to 6 are the filling of those days. And again, we'll talk more about that when we tackle that. Okay, the critical thinking questions. Describe how the biblical worldview regarding creation is different from the view of materialism. Okay, so this is a big question, and obviously there could be a lot of answers to this, but what stands out to you as far as like one of the main or some of the main differences? How does your worldview as a Christian differ from somebody who's a materialist?
Well, first, the materialist view is that Genesis is a fable. Mm-hmm. That I don't think they think any of it is true.
Right.
Anything important.
Yeah.
So I think we view it as all true.
Right.
Completely true.
Yeah.
So we're at the complete opposites of
Yeah.
of the argument.
Yeah. So, yeah, it explains why there is such a conflict today.
Yeah.
Because then it leads to everything else. It leads to morality. It leads to, why we're here. Where do we come from? You know, where are we going? Values. I mean, on and on and on. But yeah, it's all this it's this amazing conflict between materialism and supernatural belief in God. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The biblical worldview teaches that there is an eternal, self-sustaining, non-contingent, triune God who determined out of his own free creative will to create the heavens and the earth, everything in them, and make man in his image.
Yeah.
Materialism teaches that no one plus nothing equals everything, and that there is no meaning nor purpose nor value to any of it.
Yeah. Good.
And I also wrote that materialism denies God's existence while claiming the material universe is all that there is, and that the creation worldview states the existence of God and thus the existence of the non-material.
Good.
Good enough.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, good stuff. And again, you know, I think that one of the biggest, you know, not only do we have the challenge of materialism, but then that gets into, I think one of the things we need to learn how to defend better than we know how to defend is the existence of the soul. Because if you can prove there's a soul, that completely nullifies materialism. And the reality is that medical science has great data to show that we do have a soul. So there's some, if you ever want anything on this, I've got about 10 books I could recommend, especially related to near-death experiences that are done by neurologists and who have experienced thousands of people that have had near-death experiences, and how there's absolutely no explanation for how they could describe what was in the room when they were declared dead. And so if they're dead and you're just material, how could you possibly come back from that, for one, and then describe everything that was in the room when there was no heartbeat, no brain waves, nothing? And so there's thousands of cases, medical cases of this that are documented. And so that's just one way to explain, you know, the soul, but there's others as well.
Yeah, I got into that with a colleague at work once, and her husband is involved in medicine, and she just said she flat out didn't believe in God, and I was like, so you probably don't believe there's a soul? And she said no, and I said, well, so when someone dies, what is that thing that's different about when they were alive and then they're dead? What is that thing that goes away?
Yeah.
She's like, oh, I don't know, cars stop working. And I just could, the fact that she compared an inanimate object that has no feelings and no agency or nothing, like a car, to a human being. I personally, I can't believe that she actually really believes that. But was scrambling for an argument. But maybe she does. Maybe thinks that there's nothing better about a human being than a car.
Yeah,
I think
interesting.
it's true, because on page 365, it talks about the destructive influences of evolutionary theory in modern thought. So it's important to understand the incredibly destructive influences that evolutionary theory has had on modern thinking. If in fact life was not created by God, and if human beings, and if human beings in particular are not created by God or responsible to Him, but are simply the result of random occurrences in this universe, then of what significance is human life?
Right.
What's this? So we're merely a product.
And you know, racism is one of the biggest issues that is perpetuated because of evolutionary theory. Because they would see different people groups as more evolved than others. And yet the Bible clearly teaches that we all came from Adam and Eve, so we're all related. You know, there should be, I mean, racism is ridiculous. It really is, because we're all related. I mean, if you hate somebody who's different from you, you're hating from somebody that's actually more similar to you than you realize.
Right.
You know, and so it's just, it's crazy. Ken Ham has written a recent book on this that's just phenomenal. But he, again, all he's doing is just teaching what the Bible teaches about, you know, where the history of the development of different people groups and everything developed, but it's all traced back to Adam and Eve. And so, but again, our culture, this is a huge, you know, critical race theory is all based on an evolutionary premise. And then that's where we get sociological evolution, which is rampant on the universities and public school campuses. But that comes from evolution. So it's not actually a valuing of humanity, it's a devaluing of humanity.
Genocide.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And it goes on in 365 to talk about then we're merely the product of matter plus time plus chance. And so to think that we have any eternal importance or really any importance at all in the face of an immense universe is simply to delude ourselves. So honest reflection on that notion should lead people to a profound sense of despair. What do we see today?
Yeah.
A profound sense of despair. And then it goes on, if there's no supreme judge to hold us morally accountable, then therefore there are no moral absolutes in human life, and people's moral ideas are only subjective preferences, good for them perhaps, but not to be imposed on others. In fact, in such a case, the only forbidden is to say that one knows that certain things are right and certain things are wrong, and that's a common complaint against Christians. But then it goes on. There's another ominous consequence of evolutionary theory. If the inevitable process of natural selection continue to bring about improvement in life forms on Earth through survival of the fittest, then why should we hinder this process by caring for those who are weak or less able to defend themselves? Should we not rather allow them to die without reproducing so we might move toward a new, higher form of humanity? Even a master race. So it talks about Marx, Nietzsche, Hitler, and all justified war. So this is huge.
I would add to that group Margaret Schwab.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, Margaret Sanger.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this just answered so many questions
Right.
for me today. And transhumanism. Get rid of the people. Depopulate. We're
Yeah.
just going to have AI. And we're going to make our own human race because we don't answer to God.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sorry. On top of that, like survival of the fittest is not necessarily always about like which mammal's strongest. It's like which one can carry their genes on, right? Like whichever one can procreate the most. So by that, rape should be the primary way.
Yeah.
And you should have no judgment whatsoever, according to Darwinian evolutionary theory. That's the most optimal way to like carry your genes.
Yeah.
Well, that's essentially what lions do.
Yeah.
They want to spread their seed in a particular. They take over a pride.
we just watched a video on that yesterday.
They will kill all the young.
Yeah.
And then, they will because they don't want that's some other lion's genes.
Yeah.
Want theirs to go on, so they will kill off all the other babies.
Yeah.
And then mate with all of the ladies and have their own lines bred. Why shouldn't we do that?
Yeah.
Makes sense.
We're not animals.
Yeah. But they think we are. So
Right.
yeah.
And that's the classifications.
Right.
They're wrong.
Right. But yeah, you just look at almost every mess that exists in society is due to this belief. It really is.
Yeah, this just so opened my mind.
It's just so interesting, Darwin and Marx.
Yeah.
And the zeitgeist of that time birthed these people.
Right. Yeah.
The evil is
Yeah. No, good. Thanks for bringing that out, Dana. Okay. On number 21, how should the relationship between science and Scripture be understood?
I wrote that any paradoxes between them are caused by our lack of knowledge and will eventually be reconciled.
Good.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Succinct, clear, to the point.
One more time.
That was good.
I'll be glad to meet you after class. No, I wrote, any paradoxes between them are caused by our lack of knowledge and will eventually be reconciled.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, that's excellent. Okay, 22, explain the concept of human intuition, correctly recognizing that evolution is impossible with another example. And he talked about Doug Axe's example of the cat, walking on his keyboard. By the way, Doug Axe has a whole book on examples of this called Undeniable. And he got his PhD at Cambridge. And again, another guy that was ostracized from the scientific community, so he got hired by the Discovery Institute in Seattle But what do you think about in relationship to that? Any comments on that? How human intuition, yeah.
Most of the Darwinian evolutionary theories, especially with the Big Bang, claim that once the Big Bang happened, everything eventually became what it is today, right? Which breaks the second law of thermodynamics and entropy and law of causality, which essentially that everything's supposed to get worse over time, and the effect can never be greater than the cause.
Yeah.
But then the effect, as the known universe we see today, being so organized and so beautiful and able to sustain life, the way that can even occur is equivalent to that of throwing your clothes in the dryer, and then once you finish the load, they're perfectly folded.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be nice. That only happens on the Jetsons.
That's how, not just how the universe became, but how it even currently operates.
Yeah. Good. All right, good example, Mo. Okay, and then number 23, based on your reading in this chapter, do you lean more towards a young earth or old earth understanding? Explain why. So if you can give one or two reasons right now where you land, what would you say?
I plead the fifth.
Okay.
Definitely young.
Okay. So what for you? What are some of the main reasons that you're young Earth? One or two main reasons.
Well, I guess what I mentioned earlier also about the observable universe, that though Earth and the universe appears to be old physically, that there's so much evidence that shows that it didn't live through that time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, again, I take God's word at face value. When it mentions a day, and I don't believe that it would even make sense to have death before the fall.
Right.
But again, I'm more evidential.
Yeah.
In my creation, but so most of the evidence that I've observed, or that I've studied from others that I've observed, because I'm not a scientist.
Right.
It really screams that the world is young.
Yeah.
And actually, I believe in the book, he got something wrong about the expansion of the universe.
Uh-huh.
Again, I think Answers in Genesis also did a good article on this years ago, where they measured the speed in which the Milky Way was expanding, and they kind of divided it by 0, because the same way the moon is moving away from Earth at a certain amount. If you were to divide that, they'd be if it was millions of years, the moon would have collided against at some point. And that's where a lot of those theories come, that the moon came, hit the Earth, and that's in the evolutionary realm.
Yeah.
And so the Milky Way within itself, the expansion rate, it doesn't even support a 4.5, well, not 4.5 billion year old Earth, but however many millions of years it currently claim the universe is.
Yeah.
13.8.
13.8. And then someone did a chart where they showed where the Milky Way would be if it was that old, and it was you can't even tell if it was even a galaxy anymore. It was just big, cloud.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I thought it was
Good.
interesting what Charlie, shared with you, the email about him trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, Charlie was in our class on Saturday, and he really wrestled with this, but he was writing all the dates down, and he said the thing about this is if you take all the numbers he gave, they don't coincide. So there's so many discrepancies even in the dating if you go old Earth, that even that doesn't make sense. In other words, you have more problems because you have all these discrepancies of the dates. It's sort of like in a court case, having 15 different witnesses all giving a totally different story. Whereas at least with young Earth, you're holding to the same story. You're saying this happened on this day, this happened on this day, this happened on this day. And so for me, again, the biggest thing for me is I think, and here's where I agree with presuppositionalism in apologetics, is that because the Bible is the revealed word of God, and it's very clear that the Bible is authoritative, inerrant, It's verbally inspired and so forth. In other words, it's completely coherent internally, and everything, 40 authors over 1,500 years, there's no discrepancy. So when you take everything that it has to say in all the passages of Scripture, the young earth position actually aligns perfectly. No other position actually aligns perfectly when you take into consideration all of the Scriptures. So I would say that what we do discover in science, from a young earth perspective, actually does support everything the Bible says. And again, the attack on the young earth position is really not so much an attack on the evidence in science, and it's an attack on the Bible. And so why am I young earth? Primarily because I think the Bible teaches it. And it's consistent in its teaching of it. And I value, and so then I'm interpreting science through the lenses of what God has revealed about himself in the Bible and in science. But I would say that the Bible is here and science is here. But there should be no conflict, like you said, if you're interpreting those things correctly, if you have the right knowledge, the right data, and so forth. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, one more other thing I just thought of. There's so many stumbling blocks in the evolutionary community where they'll come across things that they claim were 12 million years or whatever, like that horse that they found, and then they found that there's food in its stomach still. And it's like, wait, there's a stomach? You know?
Yeah.
And they claim that what is it, the half-life is 5,730 years or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's there's literally blood.
Yeah.
That makes no sense. They have so many
Right.
instances where they will claim something's a Neanderthal or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not,
Yeah.
but you don't hear them talk about a lot
Yeah.
of what they found was not true.
Yeah. And for instance, the Sabbath is based on creation days, and it doesn't make sense that it's not a day of it's not a long time frame of rest. It's a day of rest, and it's in the rhythm of life. And so, in the creation week, you do see the rhythm of life that God makes that we need to live by.
And so, one of the arguments I think is the scripture that says for the Lord a day is like 1,000
Right.
years, and 1,000 years.
Yeah.
But isn't there also a theory that the Earth is presently around over 6,000 years old, just over 6,000 years?
Yeah.
There was something you mentioned once that it's determined that the Earth will be is for 7,000
Right,
years
right.
total of existence,
Yeah.
and that last 1,000 years will be the millennium.
Yeah.
Which means calculating backward,
Yeah.
we're close.
Yeah, that's what Henry Morris thinks.
Hank Morris.
Henry Morris, yeah.
Hank Morris.
Yeah. And I'll be using him a lot.
And the Fibonacci in relation to that with the fudge factor, you know Fibonacci
Mhm.
and all that stuff. They say it's the golden ratio, or
Yeah.
the God, I guess, number or whatever. And so, based on the biblical numerology or whatnot, that we are in the seventh millennium, that it can be 100 years into it, and it can still be rounded off to 1,000.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
we could be towards the very, very end. We could be in the seventh right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, as we've studied Revelation, we've been in Revelation for over a year, we could see how everything is lining up. I mean, again, Jesus could delay 100 years, but he could also come today, and we could easily see all the stuff that Revelation talks about happen like that. There's really nothing left that needs to take place, and we could totally see how there could be a one world leader, a one world economy. That's what the globalists want. And at this point, unless anybody stops them, they have the power and the money to do it. So, okay. We're good time-wise, unless does anybody have anything else they wanted to bring out on page 63 of any of those that you really wanted to say or had a question on before we call it a night? Okay.
Let God be true
Yeah.
and every man a liar. 27.
Yeah.
I also think of that one quote, and I don't know where it is, but it says, "I have given them strong delusion that they may believe a lie."
Yeah.
You know, just
Yeah.
go ahead on. Everybody.
Yeah.
You know, if you can't find your way back here, then
Right.
you know you're
Right.
not going to make it.
Yeah. I just look forward to all these people who've ostracized and canceled us and others, and how they're going to have to stand before God one day and literally be on their knees before God, and their mouths will be shut. They'll have nothing to say. They'll have no excuse, you know. But it was all done in their rebellion, in their moral rebellion against a holy God. So, yeah. Well, let me close this in prayer, and then we'll sing some songs. Father, thank you for just a great discussion. I thank you for each person here. I pray that you'd be watching over all those who are traveling and sick. And God, thank you so much. This is Mo's last time here. And so, Lord, it's just been awesome to have him in our church and him as a friend and get to know him. And I know we're going to keep in touch. And I'm going to be constantly asking him questions and sending him questions and just different things. So I just know we're going to keep in touch and look forward to when he visits us and whenever any of us go to Florida to see him. But Lord, thank you just so much for the fellowship and the brotherhood that we have with other believers. Thank you for Marin Bible Church, a place where that's just really a safe place to be, away from the world and the materialism and naturalism that persists around us. Thank you that there's still cogent, logical, reasonable people who believe in you and know the truth. And Lord, I pray that we would continue to do everything we can to live for your glory and your kingdom and that which lasts forever. Help us to know how to answer everyone who gives us, to give a reason to everyone who objects to our faith, but also who is interested. And Lord, we pray that many would come to Christ that we know before you return. In Jesus' name, amen.